Welcome back to the podcast, Journey to Well. I am super excited to have Patrick McConnell on today. You know, if you've listened to my podcast before, you know that I love getting different people's perspectives from different walks of life. And I specifically love getting the male perspective because we were just talking about this. I can only see my life through my lens as a female. And so to get a little intake onto what your perspective is as a man, Pat, is something that I love to talk about. So we're going to talk all about the male perspective, showing up as a man in this world. Patrick is a relationship and men's coach, helping you squash your fears, take empowered action, and love yourself in the process. I love that quote on your Instagram bio. So he's also a 4/6 sacral generator in human design. So I love to weave in some human design conversation. And then, of course, we're going to talk human design at the end of this episode. So Patrick, one of the things that I love is having my guests introduce themselves so I can see what is important to you of what you want the world to know. Who is Patrick? And introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hannah. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me on here as well. This is super exciting. So, you touched on it a little bit, but I'm a relationship coach. Also, I work with my clients in cultivating more success and really just the mindset tools that they need to move forward in their lives. And I work with men and women. I run men's groups as well. And really, my goal with my clients is to help them connect more deeply with themselves, with the people that they love, and with their higher purpose so that they can feel and be more aligned with the vision that they have for their lives.
Mm.
Um, so, yeah, that's my passion. I have always loved doing this kind of work. It's something I've wanted to do since I was a kid and finally have brought it into life and into the 3D. And now I get to chat with you all about it on this wonderful podcast.
Yay. Oh my gosh. I love that. I love that you work with men and women too. I didn't realize that. So I want to open up one of the things that I love. I met you through Instagram, and I love that. One of the things that I love that you post so much about is that kind of masculine perspective, I guess we could call it. And I was reading one of your posts one time, and you said a quote. I quoted it. It says, "To live a life of meaning, clarity, and integrity." Or maybe this is on your website, and that's what your kind of goal is in working with your clients. And you just kind of introed that in your intro as well. So I'm curious. What I always love to hear people's backgrounds. Like, why is this important for you in your life? And then why is it important for you to bring into the world and help empower others to live from a place of integrity?
Yeah. I'll just give you a quick background on my story, and then I think that might help color it in your answer a bit. So, as I mentioned, I always wanted to do this kind of work when I was a kid, and I was the kid that would tell people I wanted to be a therapist growing up.
No
Whatever
way.
reason, yeah, you could, Freudian analyze that all you want, but I always wanted to be a therapist. And actually, in high school, I was experiencing depression, and I went to see a therapist myself, and I just loved it. It was amazing. And I was like, this guy has the coolest job in the world. He gets to help people through their stuff and actually improve their lives. And so I studied psychology in school. And during that time, I got my degree and I wanted to be a therapist. That's what I was going to school for. But I got kind of burnt out on the traditional education system. If you know me, I'm a pretty adventurous guy. I don't necessarily do well in stuffy classrooms, but I love
Mm.
learning and I love exploring and living life to the fullest. And so I took that cue to go travel and explore and live my life as much as I possibly could in my 20s. And so I worked as a dive master in Australia. I was teaching yoga and meditation in Asia. I was a tour guide in Europe. And I did this all for about 5 years, really bouncing all over the place. And the common thread amongst everything that I was doing was that the moments that I felt most alive, most excited were those moments that I was helping somebody else overcome a challenge in their lives, whether that
Mm.
was biking up a big hill or moving through a yoga class that they didn't think they could do, or just be with themselves, like sit with themselves, right? And so eventually I discovered coaching, and I was like, that's it. That checks all the boxes, and I need to do this. And so before I jumped into coaching, I tried one last thing, because for me, a lot of what life is all about is exploring your curiosities. And this is what
Yeah.
I help my clients do too, right? And I was curious about software engineering. I live in San Francisco now. It was totally out of my wheelhouse. I like to challenge myself and see what is possible. And I dove into it. I gave it a shot. I became an engineer. I got a job as an engineer, and I was working actually at a coaching tech platform. It was like an app for coaches. And
Mm-hmm.
the whole time I was coaching, or I was coding, I just wanted to be coaching.
Yeah.
I was sitting there going, I want to be on that side, doing what the
Yeah.
coaches are doing. And that was ultimately when I birthed my coaching business, a bit over a year ago now. And it has been such a joy, such a journey. The moments that I get to work with my clients are really like just some of my highest joys. And so for me, I've lived a life of curiosity, of exploration, of having inklings of interest and actually acting on them. And I just see so many people who don't do that. I know so many people who have these desires, these dreams that they never act on. And for me, the last thing I'd want at the end of my life is to look back and just say, I didn't act on the things that I was curious about. And obviously there's a balance, you have to
Yeah.
sometimes stick with things and not just bounce around constantly.
True.
But it's a big joy for me to help my clients discover their own clarity, their own mission, the things that excite them and light them up, so that they can ultimately go out into the world and share their gifts and
Mm-hmm.
spread love and light in ways that they might not be doing just by playing it small or kind of sticking to the status quo. So, through my own experience, through my own life, ultimately I coach others to really tap into their own interests and their own excitements.
I love that you have lived it and now you're helping other people do it. Two things that you said, if I can recall. One thing that you said was wanting to help clients discover their passions, and so many of us don't act on our dreams and don't act on those curiosities. I love that word. We don't act on what we're curious about for fear. And you also said for fear of or we play it small because of fear. I think we kind of get stuck in fear and we play it small. And because we're playing it small, we're not going out and exploring or taking risks or experimenting what might bring us more life. So, in your experience working with clients and your life experience, why? Why do we play it small? Why do we get stuck in these places of, oh, this is just a dream. This is nothing that I can bring to reality.
Yeah, there's so many reasons and factors, right? There's familial history. Your
Mm,
parents may have told you what you dream of is not allowed, you know? Societally, we're not oftentimes taught that it's really okay to pursue something beyond the kind of traditional path of going to college, getting a job, getting married, having kids, all of that. And there's a lot of fear. A
yeah.
lot of folks are afraid, because if you think of it from just an evolutionary standpoint, a biological standpoint, if you go out and do something and you fail at it, you might get kicked out of the community, out of the tribe.
Mm,
And I see that a lot with folks, where they're afraid of being rejected and looking like a failure, and then losing their friendships and their connections and the people that they love, because they're
right.
not providing and they're not able to um, create something of themselves.
Yeah.
And so it runs really, really deep, and it's different for each individual.
Mm-hmm.
But just off the top of my head, those are just a few factors that play into it. And people like comfort.
Yeah.
It's oftentimes a question of, would you rather stay comfortable, or is the desire to explore and see what else is out there outweighing the comfort of a little bit of security and consistent income.
Hmm. Wow. That was a tough question. That was deep. You're reminding me of, I think it was Tony Robbins said this, but it's something like we don't make changes until the like fear of discomfort outweighs where we are. And that's so true. And I think that that's something important to remember is we don't always like if you don't feel ready right now, then you're not ready right now, and that's okay, and that doesn't mean that you'll never get there. But starting small, even, right, like starting small in when I think about fear and overcoming that fear, recognizing that there's so much underneath the surface, like you're even talking generationally, that we have this like in our DNA, almost one could argue, that this fear runs really deep. And starting small and moving through, like, do one small thing that makes you a little bit uncomfortable and see how that builds you. We don't have to, I think a lot of times we live so black and white that we're like, I need to uproot my whole fucking life and I need to like move away, quit my job, break up with my girlfriend or boyfriend. And like, that's not, that's very shocking to the system. That's not what we need to do.
Yeah.
I love
I
that.
have, can I share a quick example of
Yes,
this?
please.
Just last night in my men's group, one of the men was asking for support from the other guys, and he feels really stifled whenever he explores his creativity. And we kind
Mhm.
of got to the core of he really wants to explore music and creating music. Like that brings him the most excitement.
Mm.
But he brings sort of a perfectionist mindset to it, right? And gets really nervous and concerned when he doesn't play it perfectly on the first go. And one of the suggestions that I made, you can see I have a little hand pan in the background there,
Yes.
is when, as you mentioned, right, when you're starting something new, it doesn't have to be this huge astronomical leap. You don't have to become the next Jimi Hendrix off after your first guitar practice, but maybe try something a little easier, something that actually sets you up so that you start getting the dopamine hits and the positive reinforcement that, hey, actually, I'm not as bad as I think I am. Or
Yeah.
even if I am not great at it, it still doesn't sound bad. And as an
Yeah.
example, like I love the handpan because I didn't have to be great at it to start. I didn't have
Mm.
to have all these crazy lessons. I could just start hitting away at it and kind of making noise. And eventually I just improved just pretty
Mm.
quickly. And so when you're starting something new, as you mentioned, you don't have to quit your job and move to Bali and leave the country and go somewhere else
Mhm.
and blow up your whole spot just to like try this new thing. Even
Yeah.
when I was starting my coaching business, I was very much part-time on the side while I was still working my job until
Yeah.
eventually I felt like, yeah, this actually feels right to really pursue all in. So I think that's a really, the all or nothing mindset can be detrimental from really keeping anybody from just getting started in the first place.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And to add on to that, I made a joke. You were asking about how long I've had my podcast, and I was explaining I started on YouTube about 3 years ago, I think now. And I made a joke. If you want to laugh, go watch my first videos because I have this very vivid memory that I wanted to start a YouTube channel for a year. For a year, I allowed fear to hold me back, and I couldn't I just wasn't ready, and there was so much fear and so much like negative self-talk of I won't be perfect and I won't be good enough and the videos are not going to be great, like editing wise and what I'm saying wise, content wise. And then I had this moment, this realization where I was like, how are you going to get better, Hannah, if you don't do it? I'm very much a doer. I don't think everyone is this way, but I'm very much start before you think that you're ready, because if it's on your heart, then you are ready, and it's not going to be perfect. In fact, it probably will be bad. Not that my videos are a train wreck, but I actually I laugh at them. But the content is there. It's okay. But to also to be able to see the progression, like how boring would life be if you picked up an instrument and you were perfect at it? And like everything that you picked up, you were just great at and you had no struggle. You didn't have to grow. I think on a different podcast, somebody said, like, nobody wants to watch that story. Nobody wants to watch that movie if there's no up and down, if there's no projection of growth. Nobody wants that life. And yet we live in this place where, and I think a lot of it is societally because we see, like, we post, hey, look at how successful I am in my business. And hey, look at how great I am at guitar, even though it took me 20 minutes to upload this video and 500 tries, and I still edited it. Like, we need to present perfectly. That I think that we also get it in our minds just watching this content wherever you're watching it, that, oh, that person is perfect and they didn't struggle. And I think that that's something that you talk about on social media, but I would also imagine that you touch on in your men's groups. I would love to hear more about these men's groups. Like, what was the heart behind creating that, and what is the benefit of that in your community and your tribe?
Yeah, absolutely. I always try to be real with
Mm,
my stuff for the exact reason that you just touched on, right? It's like we live in this perfectly manicured
yeah.
snapshot uh anti-reality where you don't see the 20 years of practice that went into the guitar playing where this person just was terrible at it for years. And actually one of the guys in the group asked a really great question to this man yesterday, which was, how long did it take you to learn how to speak? And
Mm.
it was just this like really awesome question where I was like, oh dang, like I speak English all the time and I don't even think about it, but even that took me years, you know? And
Wow.
so um to answer your question about the men's group, it's something that I've been a part of different men's groups. I love the work. I see so much value in it. I have tons of brothers in my life, not
Mm,
blood brothers, but just men who I can turn to. It's kind of ridiculous. I look at my phone and it's just like messages with so many guys, and I feel incredibly blessed and grateful to have that in my life. And so many men don't have anything like that. And it's really heartbreaking. And I think that's one of the big issues that we're seeing today is men just feel isolated, alone. They don't have close friends. I don't
mm.
want to butcher the statistic, but I just saw something the other day that was saying something like 1 out of 4 or 1 out of 6 men can't even name a friend,
Wow.
not even just a friend at all. And
Oh,
so there needs to be more spaces like this. There are slowly becoming more spaces like this. I'm seeing it, especially as I'm steeped in this world. But
yeah.
it was just something I knew I wanted to do at some point, and eventually I mustered up the courage, just as you had mentioned too. Like you kind of just gotta give it a go. It's on your
Mhm.
heart. You're ready, right? And I started my virtual men's group, yeah, over 6 months ago now, and that's been a real journey. I actually just led my first in-person men's group last week, which was awesome. It was so
Wow.
fun. 15 guys showed up, and it was just really wonderful. We had to kick everybody out because they felt so connected, and they were just talking, and they wouldn't leave afterwards.
Yeah.
And so that to me was such a testament of one, how connected they felt, but two, just how badly guys are looking for this kind of stuff. How
Yeah.
much guys actually want this kind of work.
Mm,
And they just really need somebody to help usher them into that space, somebody who they feel they can connect with. And something that I try and focus on in my work as a coach is, yes, spirituality is incredibly important, and I infuse that into the work that I do with my clients, but also just to make it real,
mm,
to share my own vulnerabilities, to not put myself on this high pedestal that I'm some, godlike coach and you can't touch me, but rather I'm just a dude like you who is going through my own troubles, my own struggles, and it makes it all so much more relatable and accessible. And I found that that has really helped for getting guys, especially, to open
mm.
up in ways that maybe they wouldn't with their community or the people that they are closest to.
Yeah. One of my favorite things, I lead women's groups, I suppose. Although I try not to limit it, but I lead a moon circle, so I very occasionally have men show up, but mostly women. But I lead in-person circles as well. And my most favorite and rewarding part is when somebody shares something and then the person next to them, their jaw drops and they're like, oh, I feel the same way. I've gone through the same thing. I thought that I was the only one, and I'm not the only one. And to hear that is one of the, because I've experienced that in my life, and it's one of the most comforting things to know and to feel that we're not alone and that we're not that different and we're not fucked up and we're not broken. I mean, we are, right? But we all are. It's not you and it's not me. It's collectively we all have these scars and we all have these pieces of luggage that we're holding on to, and we all struggle with things. And I think when we're moving through the world, one of the biggest mistakes that we can make is thinking that we are exclusive, that we're the only one going through this. And your situation is unique, and it's not to diminish your situation or whatever you're moving through, because you are the only one, but you're not the only one that has gone through a situation that's similar. And there's people that are here to support and to love you. And me as a woman, I guess kind of like you, I was blessed to grow up with a mom that talked about feelings and invited me in and held space and witnessed me. And I grew up with all of these tools that I didn't realize that other people did not grow up with. But I also think that societally, women getting together in community and circle is a little bit more just accepted. And kind of women have that whole like competition thing going on. I feel like that's what we deal with. But with men, I feel like we just don't invite men to speak about their feelings and speak about what they're dealing with. And like, I always think, stereotypically, or I guess societally, like the man has to be the pillar and can never falter, and you're weak if you're showing your emotions. Which again, I'm blessed that I didn't grow up that way, like in my family, but I still see it out and about and in the world. So I love what you're doing. I'm curious how you how that shows up in your life and how that shows up maybe with your clients. And I mean, you've spoken that you have a really great friend group, but how does that conditioning, I think that's my question, how does that conditioning show up for you as a man in the world, but also within your community?
Yeah, it shows up in so many ways.
Yeah.
And as an example, for me personally, I just shared on Instagram that I actually took myself to the ER last week. I was getting these really crazy stomach pains.
Mm,
It came out of nowhere. I've never
yeah.
had anything like that, and it continued. It persisted for longer than what felt like it should. And
Yeah.
so I started hearing these voices in my head that were just wild, but it was all this conditioning that I've had, which was you don't need to take yourself to the ER. That's weak of you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if they find out it's nothing, then you're going to look like a fool for needing that kind of support.
Yeah.
And I was like, dang, this isn't me, right? This is
Mhm.
what society has taught me my whole life. And I really had to work through that. And as a guy who teaches other men how to do this kind of stuff, I still had to work through it. And I'm hyper aware of this constantly. And so for men who aren't steeped in this kind of work, who aren't thinking about this regularly and helping others do the same, it is so unconscious and
Mm,
shows up in men sucking it up and stuffing it down and not sharing their emotions, not feeling safe to do so,
yeah.
feeling like they can't even explain or describe their emotions. They don't know what it even means to feel anger or sadness. They can't name it.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the outside, it looks like, oh, these guys just have no feelings. And if only they could talk about their feelings, then things would be different.
Yeah.
But that's not really taking into account their experience, which in my experience has been that men are incredibly sensitive and have a deep intensity that can be scary for a lot
Mm,
of people, and they're afraid to let that go. They're afraid of what might happen if they really tap into that because they just haven't been taught how to do it. They haven't been
mm,
taught how to feel their emotions, their feelings, their experience. And so I see it all the time. And I see it with men not uh, getting together to connect and talk about what's really going on. They talk about surface level things like sports and work, but they never dive deeper than that. I
yeah,
see it with men when they forget to reach out or connect with another man
sure.
instead of just reaching out and saying, "Hey, sorry, I forgot." They drive themselves into the shame cycle of feeling like, well, now I haven't messaged this person. I need to just dig myself deeper into this hole. I've had guys tell me
Mm,
that. They're like, I'm sorry, it took me weeks or even months to respond. I felt a lot of shame around missing it the first time, and then I didn't know how
wow.
to respond after that.
Yeah.
And so, what comes off as men being walled up, not basically pulling away, shutting down, all of that is really just a lack of education, a lack
Mm,
of access to what they're feeling. And if given the tools, the embodiment tools, ways of actually really feeling into their emotions in a way that makes sense for them,
mm,
they are able to tap into this stuff that I know so many women would love to hear about, and
yeah.
it's just a question of how do we actually educate men in a way that doesn't promote further shame, because a lot of men experience deep shame around their manhood and their lack of abilities to touch into these emotions, so that they can really start learning to express in a way that feels safe for them as well.
Hmm. I have so many things going through my mind and I need to organize myself. You said so much good stuff. Um, Shame. Have you heard of Brene Brown?
Totally. Love
Okay,
Brene
so
Brown.
she, her whole work is on shame. So if you're listening to this and you have not heard of Brene Brown, whether you're a male or female, go listen to some of her podcasts or her talks because there's so much there. I don't want to misquote her, but she says something about like that's the root of all of our actions is to avoid feeling shame and to not feel shame. So much there. My question though is how do we start as a male? How do you start tapping into your emotions? One of the things that you said was like they don't often, sometimes we don't even know what we're feeling or how to label it because we haven't been taught to excavate that emotion or to explore what is coming up in our bodies or in our psyche. How do you start? Where do you start?
Yeah. It's unfortunate that there's not a manual for this, right?
We
Maybe
wish.
there should be. We could make one.
Maybe
So,
you should make one.
yeah, exactly. For so many men, and I also don't want to diminish there are plenty of men also who, when you ask them how they're feeling, they'll be able to tell you, right? And
Yeah,
so, like, this is a blanket statement that men maybe don't have as much access to their feelings.
yeah.
With that said, a great way to start is to journal. I recommend to all of my male clients, journaling is just like the easiest entry. And I know it's probably been said a million times,
Mm,
but it's low barrier to entry. You
yeah.
don't have to tell anybody else what you're experiencing, and it gets you out of your head and the thoughts onto paper. And so you can actually see it in the physical. And for so many men, myself included, we suffer what I call loop brain, which
Okay.
is where we start to get into these cycles of logical thinking and trying to solve our emotional problems with logic, and or vice versa, and you just start looping, and there's no way to beat the logic when it's a matter of the heart. And so if you
Mm,
can write it down and actually disrupt that pattern, that's one just really quick, easy way to do it. And it can be vulnerable, it can be challenging, and it's a great way to practice vulnerability as well without having
mm,
to maybe speak to your partner or your
yeah.
boss or whoever it is. So that's one thing. Getting men in their bodies and feeling embodied is huge.
Mhm.
If you don't exercise if you don't have any sort of movement routine or practice, you got to start.
Mhm.
And it's plain and simple, because otherwise you're really going to be looping in your head all day. You're
Yeah.
going to be ruminating in your shame cycle, and getting in your body, however you need to do it, even if it's just going for a walk, will help to disrupt that as well and just get you out of your head a little bit.
Mm.
And then when it comes to actually tapping into your emotions in maybe a more conversational way, something for men to chew on is, rather than what are you feeling, you can ask them, what do you think about that?
Hmm.
Or what are your thoughts on that? Because a man will have a million opinions, right? But he might not be able to tap into his feelings.
Yeah.
And so this is one way to do it. And then as he's talking about it, this is just something that I do with my clients, and
Mhm.
we dive deeper with this practice, but this is just surface level.
Yeah.
As he's talking about it, you ask him, okay, what are you noticing about your breath as you talk about this? What are
Mm.
you feeling in your chest as you talk about this? Are you noticing anything about your leg tapping while you talk about the discomfort of having a conversation with your partner, as an
Yeah.
example? And that helps to get them out of their logic mind into a sensation, something that they can experience in their body, which they can name. And
Mm.
from there, they can start to actually tap into their feelings through some deeper work. But
Mm.
getting guys the education, and so for men to just start thinking about what it is you're thinking, or feeling into your body as to what you're feeling, and then investigating what is that part of your body asking for, what is that sensation asking for.
Yeah.
That's when you can start to uncover what feelings are actually there,
Mm.
by slowly uncovering and diving in, rather than just, hey, what are you feeling, which requires maybe some digging and excavating first. So
Yeah.
those are just a few ways that I would recommend for guys to start tapping into the deeper aspects of their psyche.
I love that. One of the things that I always say in my breathwork intro is emotions live somewhere in our body. And this is the whole root of trauma work. Um, but emotions get stuck somewhere in the body. And trauma is used broadly. Like this could just be a little t trauma situation or just a very stressful situation. You have a really uncomfortable conversation with your partner or your boss, and you feel you it's something shows up in your body, but we spend all of our time, our whole life, really not paying attention to the body and living in our mind. So just to begin noticing sensations, I think that was a really helpful tip of like beginning what I would call somatic work. But
Yeah.
yeah, and you would too. For sure.
For sure. And I would add to that, definitely breath work is a huge one, right? I literally
Yeah.
just did a breath work journey this last Sunday.
Yeah.
I was actually feeling kind of numb leading up to it, which to me is scary, because if I
Hmm.
can't feel any of my emotions, I'm really like overwhelmed. I'm full.
Hmm.
And I need to release something. And in the breathwork session, tears were flowing. I was screaming. I was yelling. I was tapping into anger,
Yeah.
and things that for many men it's really scary to do so. And so I felt so much better afterwards. I felt so much lighter. I was in tune with how I was feeling in a great way.
Yeah.
And so yeah, any sort of breathwork journey, somatic journey, anything that you can do to really get in your body. And then of course,
Yeah.
working with a therapist, working with a coach
Yeah.
who you vibe with, and it can take
Mhm.
time. So if you find somebody and you don't vibe with them right away, I see a lot of guys who are like, yeah, I tried a therapist and I didn't like her style and now I'm good. And it's like, don't give up just because this one therapist didn't really match with you. There's a
Yeah.
lot more out there, and the more that you can have somebody as a sounding board who you feel safe with, who you
Hmm.
feel has got your back, has got you in all of your emotions in your totality, you'll really be able to start exploring and expanding in ways that you might not really be able to do just on your own.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we get this. I think the toxic masculine is, or the wounded masculine, whatever you want to call it. I think that mindset is that, oh, I'm just going to do it all by myself. I can do it all by myself. And one of my, I probably said this, I think, in the podcast last week, but one of my biggest life lessons is learning, yes, I can do it all by myself, but I don't want to do it all by myself, and it's not the most effective way to move through this world. So thank you for bringing that up, and recognizing that's not weakness. Like reaching out for help, it actually takes more strength. You are more courageous to reach out for help, whether that's working with a coach, a therapist, going to some sort of session like a breathwork session. If whatever you feel the most comfortable with starting at, start there. There's no perfect way to start, no perfect place to start for one individual. Just whatever you feel most comfortable. Maybe it is journaling. I loved that tip that you gave too, of that way you're not, it's not as vulnerable because you're not putting that out into someone else. You're not kind of like handing this to someone else. And start there, and then see where you can go from there.
Yeah. Can I share one quick example of the
Yeah.
lone wolf experience? The kind of I'll do it on my own. So I was talking to a guy in my Instagram DMs, and his narrative was that I couldn't help him. Nobody could help him. He's broke. He has nothing
Mm.
going for him, and he's hopeless.
Mm.
And I can't tell you how many guys feel that, even if they don't share that.
Yeah.
And so he's at a rock bottom point. And sometimes guys need tough love. Sometimes guys need somebody to just be real with them. And instead of being like, well, it's okay, this and that, I was like, how's that going for you? Trying to figure it out on your own. And he was like, it's not good. And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah. But he's like, but that's how it is. This is what I've been taught to do, sink or swim. And I was
Mm.
like, cool. Well, do you want to be another statistic of the four men, or that men are four times more likely to commit suicide than women are
Mm.
because you're trying to figure it out on your own and you want to sink so deep that you can't get back out? Or do you want to just try something different and give it a shot and see what happens? And he got on a call with me. We didn't end up working together, but
Mm.
he was so grateful to
Wow.
have that space to just talk with somebody and to have
Yeah.
somebody who actually challenged him.
Yeah.
Men like challenge, and they don't get enough of that. And that's why we see a lot of like passivity in men these days. And
Mm.
um, he felt challenged and he felt encouraged to step up and try something different. And we just set up like a little thing where he's checking in with me every day as sort of like an accountability thing. And
Yeah.
he was beyond grateful. And there are so many men out there who desperately actually want support, even though what they're telling you is that I need to figure it out on my own.
Yeah.
And sometimes what they need is just a kick in the ass to say, okay, I got to try something different because otherwise things aren't going to go so well.
Yeah.
Uh, So I just wanted to share that because
Thank
it's the lone wolf mentality. I see it a lot,
you. Mm-hmm.
and usually that actually is a deep cry for help, and it requires a certain strength and challenge to help them overcome that.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's going to speak really loudly to a lot of people. And it's so true. Men and women, actually. I would probably assume more men, but this leads me to my last question before we get into human design. Um, I sent you this reel yesterday, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, let's talk about this on the podcast." The question was, "What is one thing, men? What is one thing that you wish more women understood?" And then women, what's one thing that you wish more men understood? So I'm gonna let you go first. What is one thing that you wish more women understood?
Yeah. Well, I think we touched on that men are actually deeply sensitive and just
Yeah,
need support in space and an understanding of how to access their emotions
yeah.
rather than just like, I don't get it. Why can't he talk about his feelings? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the answer that comes to mind for this question in that case is men, there's so many men who are trying so dang hard and really care and want to provide and just like are doing whatever they can, whatever they think is best to really help, however misguided it might be. And
Mm-hmm.
whether it feels helpful or not, I wish more women knew that men just need to be acknowledged. And this is also just a people thing, but I think
Mm.
particularly for men, they gain so much energy from being acknowledged for their efforts, for the things that they're doing and trying to do, even if it didn't pan out exactly as you wanted. As an example, like let's say a man, your partner tries to clean the kitchen or something, and he doesn't do a great job.
Yeah.
Okay, sure, acknowledge him anyways.
Hmm.
Acknowledge him for his attempt, for his effort, for the fact that he wanted to support you, because he is most likely assigning a lot of his value and worth to whether or not he gets acknowledged by
Wow.
you for what he did. And so he wants to provide, he wants to help. And unfortunately, most guys just don't get acknowledged. They don't get acknowledged in their jobs, they don't get acknowledged in their relationships. And that's what leads to men feeling alone, to feeling like they have to do it on their own, to
Huh.
feeling isolated and like they don't have any other people to go to.
Yeah.
And so if you can just start acknowledging them for their efforts, it will help tremendously with them feeling better about themselves and also them doing the things that you want them to do more. So
Yeah.
it kind of
Yeah.
becomes this positive feedback loop the more that you can really acknowledge the men in your life for the things that they do.
Wow. I am so guilty of being like, you didn't fucking do it right. Like, like, and not, and just skipping over that. I think that there's different ways that we can approach that conversation of he cleans up the kitchen, right? Of like, babe, you didn't do it right. Like, this is not where the dishes go. This is, you left a fork dirty or whatever. Or I love so much that you clean up the kitchen. I had such a busy day. I really, really appreciate you. Just so you know, next time the bowls go in that cabinet or something like that, where you're still, does that still count? Where you're still acknowledging them, but you're like, by the way, this goes over here.
Yeah, it's a good question. It can kind of come off as sort of like, hey, thanks, but actually,
Right.
right? And so um, in that scenario, like if you want something done differently,
Mm-hmm.
then I would just say like, thank you so much. Like I see your effort and your willingness to help support me on such a busy day, and I love you for that, and it means so much to me.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe next time, if you'd be open to it, we can clean together, and I can show you some specifics on like how I might like this thing done or that thing done. Would you be open to that? And then we can
Mm.
do it together and feel supported in that way too. That's just an example, right? And that
Yeah.
way it doesn't feel like, hey, I just brought you this amazing thing and now you're slapping it out of my hand, but rather like, oh wow, thank you. And next time let's go together and we can get it and go exploring together and see how this works for both of us. Yeah.
Mm. I
As
love
an
that.
example.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so mine, what I wish more men knew. I think my biggest thing that I wish more men knew is that I think they can get very stuck in the fix it mentality when we're telling them about our problems or really how we're feeling in the moment. One of the ways that I've kind of worked on crafting my delivery when I'm upset about something is naming I feel this way right now. It doesn't mean that this is the reality like of the whole situation, but right now in this moment, I'm feeling frustrated. Right now in this moment, I'm feeling very defeated. And so that's one of the ways that I've kind of tried to mitigate that, but being stuck in that or living in that fix it mentality, which is totally normal because we don't want to see the people that we love hurting. But I wish more men knew that your ability, like your capacity to show up, can truly just be witnessing your woman in wherever she is in that moment, and you don't have to fix it, and it doesn't mean that the world is ending if she's like bawling her eyes out about something. We just need to get it out. And then like you said, like when you went to the breathwork session and you allowed yourself to cry and scream and yell, I think there's so much power in just allowing ourselves to feel fully where we are and to be validated in that, especially by our partner or maybe a male best friend or a dad, whoever's listening. Being validated in your feelings is more, at least for me, is more powerful than, oh, well, why don't you just tell her to do this? Or, here, let me tell you every way that you could fix your problem. That would be something I think that I wish more men understood.
Totally. For the listeners out there, somebody, if you haven't heard of her, her name's Allison Armstrong, and she does a lot of amazing research on men and male-female relationships, and
Mm,
she talks about these kinds of things too. And so I highly recommend checking out her books to just dive deeper into maybe male or female psychology. And just to touch on what you shared there, you know, I think there's kind of like two approaches that I take to help diffuse. I've been with my partner for almost 4 years now, and when she's experiencing her emotions, and I like to think of men as maybe like the forest or the mountain, and women as sort of the weather rolling through, and it
mm,
changes, it comes and goes, and
mhm,
uh, a question to ask if it's not about your relationship specifically is just what would feel most supportive for you right now,
mm.
plain and simple, because that then gives her, or anybody really, the empowerment to say, I would like to just express and vent, or I
Yeah,
would love like a solution to this, right?
yeah.
So it's like an easy way to just be like, cool, I'm not going to mess this up. What do you need? And don't worry, guys, like you just say that and then you get your answer from there. And, or if it's between the two of you and there's something that maybe you messed up and you're like, I didn't want to mess this up, but also there was this thing or that thing, the guy trying to like operate from this logical mind when their partner is totally in their emotions,
Mhm.
all you have to say is, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And that's it. Don't say anything else. I'm not sorry, but, or I'm not sorry and, or I'm sorry.
Mm.
Just let it land. And eventually your partner will kind of come back to the present moment and you can have more of a conversation rather than trying to solve something while the weather is going all over the place, right? So
Yeah,
just two little anecdotes if you ever find that
I love
uh
that.
you know your partner or a woman is in their emotions and you don't know how to handle it.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of times what I witness when I do a little bit of like relationship coaching is we just want to be heard and we just want to be acknowledged and we just want man or female, we just want our partner to know like this bothered me and it's valid that it bothered me. It doesn't mean that like we don't need to keep harping on it, and we can be a little bit productive in moving on, but a lot of times I think that we skip over that acknowledgement and the I'm sorry. Like I'm that's yeah, so simple. So
Yeah,
simple.
it'll squash the issue right then and there.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I
So
love
I love
that.
that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So before we move into human design, is there any last thing that you wanted to touch on, or when you were thinking about coming on this podcast, you're like, I really want to say this and make sure that I use this platform to get this message across?
I just think to really summarize this conversation, for the men listening, it's okay to get some help.
Mm,
It's okay to receive help, and the people in your life will thank you. It's actually, as you mentioned earlier, it's one of the strongest things you can do, and ultimately you can then provide and support in the way that you really want to from a stronger place. And
mm,
for um, the women who are listening, if a man pulls away from you, if he says he needs his space, if he says he needs to think about something for a bit, let him.
mm,
Just let him do that. Don't try and get the answer right then and there. Don't try and pry deeper on his feelings because all that's going to do is wall him up further and make it even harder to connect. And so if he says I need to think about it, he needs to think about it and he'll come back to you. assuming this is a remotely healthy relationship, to to let you know what he came up with. But for a lot of guys, it's not as quickly as accessible maybe as it might be for women. So be
Mm.
patient and just let him go through his process as well so that he can come back to you as prepared as possible.
I love that. There's so much power in space. And I think, I mean, without getting so deep into attachment styles, but if you are familiar listening to this with attachment styles, one of my biggest tips with like the avoidant and anxious attachment styles when we come together in partnership is one of the ways to kind of support both of these attachment styles is when your partner asks for space, make a plan of like, okay, I'm fine giving you your space because it is more beneficial because they have time to think it out and they're not going to wall up. And okay, so we're having this really deep discussion. You need time. What feels like a long enough time period for you? Like, can we talk tonight? Do you want to talk tomorrow morning? Do you want to talk tomorrow afternoon? Like, let's make a plan so that way both people, you're giving your person their space, and you also know you're not just sitting there anxiously waiting like I don't know when he's going to approach me again and I have a million things running through my mind and this is super uncomfortable for me because I'm a talk it out person. Make that plan. And that's a super helpful tip that has been beneficial in my life and people
Yeah,
that
I completely agree. Yeah, having that plan is really helpful for both parties.
yeah, I love it. All right, let's talk human design. My favorite
Let's do
part.
it.
Actually, the whole thing is my favorite part. So you know a little bit about human design. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, Patrick is a 4/6 sacral generator, which I like to describe human design kind of like astrology. We have the big three, we have our sun, moon, rising signs. Human design to me, I always list the big three, which is our profile. Well, let me go in order. Our energy type, our authority, and our profile. So your energy type is a generator. You already know a little bit about generators. The most interesting thing to me, I always like read through my clients, well, not client, guest chart in this instance, my guest chart, and I'm like, this stands out to me. So your profile, you're a 4/6, which is there's a couple different names depending on which apps you're using. The regal authority figure or the opportunist role model. And each line, it's kind of written as a fraction if you see it written out. So it's like 4/6. The first line is typically how we most easily see ourselves. It's it's the conscious line. The second line is how others typically see us or view us, and sometimes we have a harder time seeing ourselves that way, but it's also called the unconscious line. So sometimes like there's just like nuances of that sixth line in your case. One of my favorite things that is about your profile being a 4, the 4 line is called the people person, and you literally you create opportunities, you manifest, you bring in opportunities through your relationships, through people that you know. And just viewing you on social media, I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense to me, because you are someone that has literally like developed your business around creating and cultivating relationships. And for the 4 line, they're really obviously social, but they're really like stability seeking and very focused, I suppose you could say, on laying like a strong foundation and having a strong foundation to then bounce off of. So I love that about the 4 line. One of the quotes that really describes a 4 line is your network is your net worth. And so people, the 4 lines, whether it's your conscious or unconscious line, because we have the opposite, we have like a 6/4 profile, blah, blah, blah. 2/4 profile, 4/2 profile. They are really, relationships are really important to them. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be the most outgoing person or you have to have a million relationships. It's the quality of your relationships and finding people that really resonate with you because we're kind of talking about like how we become who the five people we hang out the most with. Like that's really important for the four. The sixth line, part of what I heard when I was reading through the sixth line and knowing you very little, a little bit, is the sixth line actually plays. This is a really interesting line because it has like three different tiers to it, depending on which stage you are in your life. So the first stage is basically ages 0 to 30-ish, depending on, this is where we get into astrology, depending on when your Saturn return happens, but 0 to 30. And that sixth line actually plays a lot more like a three, which is the trial and error. So I am a three line. So when we're sitting in the beginning of the podcast talking about like everything that you explored in your 20s, and you're like, I went to Asia, I was in Europe, I was in Spain, wherever you were, like that quintessential three line, not that all threes travel the world, but a lot of experimentation and learning through trial and error. One of my like mantras as a three is that we truly never fail. We just learn. If you failed at something, you learn something. Or if you weren't successful, you learn how not to do something. And then that second stage, which you're maybe moving into a little bit now or in the next few years, again, depending on like your Saturn return, is you become more of that like observer, and you take all of the knowledge, all of the experimentation, all the trial and error that you went through, and you really move into this kind of like cocooning transformational phase where in human design we call it like going up on the roof. So you have that different vantage point where you're kind of looking down at everything and incorporating all of what you've learned and all of your knowledge into the world, and then how you want to ultimately in stage three present that to the world. And that would be around after your Chiron return. So yeah, anyway, very brief. There's so much to talk about in profiles, but I always am curious like how that lands, how that hits for you. Yeah, what did you think?
Yeah, it sounds pretty accurate, to be honest. I am known in my friend group as they call me a super connector because
Yes.
that's just what I do. It's always what I've done best is just being able to connect with anybody, regardless of your status or your professional path or your background. And that's to me, my greatest joy is connecting with people from all walks of life. And so that makes a lot of sense, just like the social aspect. And when I think about all of my big opportunities that I've had in my life, they always come from my connections and the people that I
Yeah.
know. So uh, that checks out big time. And yes, lots of trial and error.
Yeah.
That's that's been my whole thing. And I think with a generator, not knowing a ton about human design, but I think with a generator, it's all about like doing, right?
Yeah.
And trying things. And that's just been my MO. It's like if I'm curious about it, go try it. The only way I can really find out if I actually like something or if it's meant for me is not just by sitting there thinking about it all day or reading
Mhm.
about it, but actually just doing the thing. And uh, so far, that hasn't led me astray. It's led to a very interesting, wild life, and yeah, I like pursuing my interests in that way. So this all checks out, and yeah, kind of in this like cocoon phase too. Allison Armstrong, who I just mentioned, she kind of talks about like the knight, prince, and the king, and
Okay.
it's similar in a way. The knight is going off adventuring, slaying the dragons, having fun,
Mm.
adventure, like just trying different things. And then the prince wakes up and is like, it's time to like build. I need to start building and setting myself up for the future and kind of figuring out where am I going to stake my claim, right? So eventually I can move into the more secure, confident, balanced king phase. And
Yeah.
so just to put it back into kind of the masculine perspective of it, but it feels pretty accurate to me.
No, I love that analogy. I might steal that actually. Talking about my six lines now. But yeah, absolutely. And learning through where you were talking about generators like the doer and all of that. also you having a sacral authority, and I do too, so I'm saying we, when sacral authorities, like you almost have to be in the situation for you to have that. Like a sacral authority has like a very full body yes no, pull forward, push back, like opening close, however you want to explain it. And so for me, I have learned like I need to be in the situation, present me with that question or that experience, and my body will literally tell me, like it will light up or go dark or like go really like I don't know, like shaky in the yes or the no. So learn through the experimentation, learn through exploration, and then then you know what lights you up. And generators are all about learning what lights you up, because you're not created to do everything, you're created to do what lights you up. So
Mm,
anyway, so
beautiful.
much fun stuff with human design. As always, this is a broad statement. If you want to explore your own human design chart, if you feel like I'm a 4/6, but I don't align with anything, there's so many different nuances in human design that it's hard just to talk about one aspect of your human design and be like, this is who you are. So have your human design chart read, and then you can explore in a more holistic approach. But it's always a fun conversation for me to have. To close, where can people find you? I feel like all of the men listening to this podcast and women need to go and follow you on Instagram. So how can people find you and connect with you?
Yeah, my Instagram is coaching with dot pat, coaching with dot pat. You can also find my website, which is coachingwithpat.com. But I would say my Instagram is definitely the best way to follow along the journey and see my upcoming offerings as well.
Yeah, and you put out such great content. So thank you for all that you do to make
Yeah,
this world a better place and a more communicative place.
likewise, Hannah. Thanks so much for having me here and continuing to spread the good word. Let's get out there and change the world one podcast at a time.
Agreed, agreed. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.